So today I kind of want to start with the movie Pieces of a Woman.
Everybody said, gave it such bad reviews, how there was really nothing about the poor care and any kind of contribution that the untrained midwife had. It was more about just this woman's journey somehow. And the other stuff was just swept under the rug like it really wasn't important and it should have been.
Yeah. So I'll start with, since we're going to talk about Pieces of a Woman, who watched it? First off, who actually watched it or got through it?
I did.
Okay.
Me.
I know. And the other two ladies that are coming on, they watched it too. Outside view of not with us, but okay. So we've heard people with the reviews or whatever. Madison, what did you think about the movie? What's your honest opinion?
So I actually have like a long-standing relationship with movies. Movies are my like go-to escape plan anytime something's happening. My daughter's father works in independent film and stuff like that. So my understanding of movie making and my rationale around that part of it is so different than the story they tried to tell, where like the cinematography and everything, like they really committed to making a phenomenal film, but they picked up different pieces of true stories and put them together with no commitment to telling the truth of the story that they decided to tell. There was somewhat of a commitment in the birth death scene to what it really looks like. But after that, it's not really anything relatively similar to what losing your child in a home birth or midwife assisted birth situation looks like.
And I agree, because I actually, when I went through it, I took notes because I was like, okay, everybody's watching this. I need to like be prepared, because there's stuff like you watch a movie and you might forget parts of it. So I agree. I thought the birth scene wasn't actually too bad. I thought the birth scene was probably the best part of the whole movie, which is kind of crazy because a baby dies. But when they call the midwife and the midwife can't get there, that is so common. It is so realistic to a lot of people that have lost babies. They call their midwife, the midwife can't get there. They send over randoms, like someone else, maybe another midwife, maybe an assistant, maybe a doula, maybe just another pregnant mother. They send someone else over there. So that was very realistic. I was like, whoa. And she came there relatively fast. So she probably was the midwife that like lived down the street. Like my assistant to mine would have been, she literally lived a couple blocks from my house. Like she could walk to my house, the one that was supposed to be for my birth. So I was like, okay, that's normal. But the midwife never ever showed up at all. And at some point when I was watching the birth, I thought, is she actually a midwife? Or is she someone else? Like, where is this? Like, I started kind of questioning, like my logic started clicking in, like, oh my God, is she just a random stranger, like checking her, doing cervical checks? Because that right there was a very different, she was like doing cervical checks, but she wasn't actually like really checking mom. She wasn't like doing anything else. It's like the normal other checks. So I kind of like wrote that down. I was like, okay, midwife didn't come. She's like checking. There's like different stuff, but it was like, I don't know. The other thing that I did notice, which I really kind of liked, was they did show an element of the midwife did know things were going wrong. Now, we don't know if it happened in minutes that this happened or hours or days. We really don't know how long she labored, because they did it like how you said, Madison. It was very like pretty. They did it very artistic. So the way that they did it, like, for example, when she got out of the water and there was blood in the water, like blood in the water is like an omen. It's a bad sign. So I was like, they did it very, very like artsy. So I don't know if she had known for hours that there was trouble and she didn't call anybody, but I was like, okay, so that kind of was like kind of up in the air. But I did think the scene was the best part of the movie, because it showed, even when the baby's born, here comes this beautiful, healthy baby. she gives over to mom and dad. The midwife turns around and she was like having a panic attack. Did you notice that? Like, did you notice she was like
that
freaking
was
out?
Actually, for me and my boyfriend, that was the most unrealistic part of the labor for us, because my labor, I was at she calls it a birth center. It's not a birth center. It's a house that my midwife owns that people deliver babies in. It's not licensed. It's not accredited. I refuse to call it a birth center. It's a birth house. So I was at her birth house for 16 hours in labor, and I was pushing for 12 hours before my son died, before the ambulance was called. And when you look at the paperwork of my labor versus the memories that we have of my labor, they're two totally different situations. And so for us, looking at the paperwork, it shows my midwives were perfectly aware. Well, there was one midwife who was a CM. There was an RN who moonlights with my midwives and works in a local hospital on mother baby. There was my doula, and then there was like 3 other random people who were there that were associated with my midwives. And the paperwork shows that every single one of them knew what was happening. But every time I asked, they were like, everything's fine. Everything's normal. And it was very much like cultish, chanty, where like the, that Star Wars Disney Plus show, The Mandalorian or whatever it is, Mandalorian.
Yeah.
In that show, they say this is the way. Like every time Mando says goodbye to one of his fellow people, they go, this is the way. And the whole time I was in labor, every time I said something that I was like, this doesn't feel right. This doesn't feel normal. Is this okay? It was literally, this is the way, this is the way, this is the way, like hypnotic, trancy, but they knew what was going on and they knew it wasn't normal. And it was like they doubled down on their confidence in themselves and did not show any sort of physical outward appearance of fear. And this midwife, you watch as she's falling apart. She knows things are going wrong. She's getting frazzled. She's checking her book. She's writing things down. And she tells the husband, you know, transferring to the hospital isn't that big of a deal, or however she says it, that segment of the labor and delivery, and when the baby came out breathing and she has that meltdown in the mirror before realizing something's wrong, those showed such a level of understanding of the lethality of midwifery that I did not witness or see at all in my real life death of my child.
And I think part of that was I call the movie more Hollywood. They did a lot of Hollywood things. They threw in a lot of drama. They threw in all these bits and pieces to make it more like a Hollywood movie. So I kind of was thinking, like, when I watched it, when you see there's things wrong, she is dismissing it. Like, she's like, oh no, everything's fine. Because even he has a moment where he was like, is everything okay? And she's like, no, like, or she was like, yeah, everything's okay. But we know we're going to have to just keep an eye. And I'm just writing things down. She was very dismissive. Like, it's not a big deal. And then going back to the mom, who we know in home birth is like the big focus of home birth. Like, it's up to us to make the decision of if we want to go to the hospital or whatever we want to do. But she actually didn't say anything to the mother whatsoever, like ever at all. And she was actually doing like checks on her, which I know a lot of women at home, and I don't know, I'll ask Bambi too, but did you get any checks when you were during labor? Did they actually do any cervical checks like they would do like at the hospital or anything like that?
With my first home birth, I think she did like one.
Okay.
And then with the second one, we all know she didn't bother showing up. She showed up like an hour and a half after Mary Beth was born, said, hey, your baby's in perfect condition. She's totally healthy, normal. And we know how that ended.
Yeah. And seeing that was another thing when they said like the midwife didn't show up, like the midwife wasn't coming. And it was like, she was like, mom started kind of panicking, like, what do you mean my midwife's not coming? Like, I'm going to be by myself. And there's the moment of like, if your midwife hadn't shown up, like, would she just go to hospital? Would she be birthing alone? Like, there was all these things that was going to go on. And I do think they got that part right. But when the midwife came, she had such a, she didn't really do very much. Like, I don't know if you noticed, she was like kind of like quiet. Like normally they're like coaching you on, like, yeah, everything's great. And they're like super like empowering, I guess is the way that they put it, is like they're just basically like, yeah, everything's fine, oh, this is normal, everything's normal. And so she kind of was like checking her, but then it was like I don't know, it seemed a little bit pushy, because there's a point where she's like pushing like on the bed and she's like, okay, we're gonna check you again, and she's like, what, you're gonna check me again? And then that was like kind of the moment that I realized the mom wasn't really part of the birth anymore, because now the midwife is like, either she's panicking or there's stuff going on. And that's when I'm like, in my mind, knowing like how home birth goes, knowing whatever, I thought this midwife, whatever her title is, or if she's even a midwife, is in panic mode and she's checking to see if baby's even coming out. Because if baby's not actually coming out, she probably knows she has to get them to the hospital like now. But instead she was like, oh, there's the baby's coming out. So she was very dismissal. But when baby came out, you know, here you go.
That's when I think she said the thing about like, you've got to get this baby out on this push. And that's where, at that point, all of us who live this life now, we know that that is the point of responsibility, where that was the latest moment that she had to be doing and operating within the realm of what her profession dictates. That husband should have been told, you call an ambulance right now. Like, it should not have gotten to that point, but that was the last moment where she could at least say she tried. And to be completely honest, the midwife who owns the facility that my son died in, I hear stories like that from her all the time. I've actually had to start telling people, you can't come to me with this. If you have an issue with what happened with you, you have to take it up with the proper people, because stories have been coming to me so often that people are like, she screamed at me that I had to push my baby out, and like nothing. And I was like, okay, I didn't get that in my labor. I got no cervical checks until I was already swollen, until there was already complications. But that's something that was so realistic to the people that I know of who've had the successful home births, where it was like, was it successful? Was your shoulder dystocia and postpartum hemorrhaging worth the experience? And that's something else that this movie also didn't go into, is how very, very often this mother-focused model of care also does lifelong damage to the mothers who happen to survive it.
Mm-hmm. No, you're right. They actually, if you go through the movie, when they go off and they see, like, I don't know if there was like the coroner, they're going off to do stuff, they didn't actually say why the baby even died. They didn't say, by the way, your baby had meconium in the lungs. By the way, your baby was having problems with this. By the way, this stuff. They said nothing. It literally was an undetermined death, which again, an undetermined baby death is not going to have you a court case. Like, we already know that. So here the state or country or wherever is prosecuting this midwife without the parents even. The parents weren't even a part of it. They actually came into it later. But yet at the same time, the midwife's being prosecuted for a death that nobody even knows what it was. So how is it preventable or not preventable was kind of the thing, which I was like, unfortunately, from what I've learned, majority of deaths of babies, when they do look into them, they do find where it kind of led to whatever happened. Like, you know, there is a reason, and it is there. It just, you have to do the research to find it. You can't just be like, oh, they died. Like, it's just not very realistic. So I thought the case going on was a little bit extreme. And then she had no emotion the whole freaking movie. Like, that drove me absolutely insane, because I know mothers from all over the world that have lost babies of all different, from miscarriages to toddlers. And yet This woman had no emotion the whole freaking movie. She never cried. She never had anything. Her partner had more emotion and broke down more than she did. And I was like, because she like for a while, I did think maybe she's in shock. Okay, she's in shock. Her body's going through all these things. They did show like she went to the bathroom and there was like the underwear you get from the hospital where she's still bleeding. They did show she came in the house after work and she grabbed like ice peas and put it on herself and went in the other room. They did show the parts of like what does happen. Like your milk still comes in, you're still bleeding after you have a baby. They did show those things, but they didn't show her have any sort of emotion at all. They had no breakdowns, no nothing. And I thought that was very, like, it wasn't very human. It didn't feel real. And then they just threw in all these elements of all these other people, the family drama, I don't even know if it's her husband or boyfriend drama, and all these different things were happening. And they just threw it in. And that's where it felt more Hollywood, was they were like, okay, we have to go away from the baby that died. And now we have to just throw in all these different things. And if it was kind of around her journey, I think they should have shown more of like her feelings. Like, what did she actually feel? What was she actually going through? We only seen like, okay, obviously she's still bleeding. Okay, she got her milk in, but we never actually seen like, how does she feel? There was only one point in the car where she was saying, maybe it was the time that I had sushi when we got pregnant, or the time when I drank that glass of wine right before we conceived, or she was like blaming herself and her body. And then she said to him, or maybe it's you because of your stuff from before. And he's like, I've been sober for 3 years. And there was a moment of like this battle of they were blaming themselves, which I do think after you lose a baby, it is extremely common to blame yourself, to blame your body. What did I do wrong? Like, I know that I did it. And I asked the questions of, that's actually how I started finding out what my midwife did was, what did my body do wrong? What did I do wrong? Did I not exercise enough? Did I not walk enough? Did I not drink enough water? What did I do wrong that caused this to happen? And also, I never want to happen ever again. Like, if this is something wrong with me, I never want to be pregnant again. But if there's something I can change in the future, like I was like really in that sort of way. I don't know if you guys, I mean, a couple of you've lost babies, but did you guys do a similar thing of like questioning your own body afterwards? Shaking.
My problem with my situation was that I was a VBAC with my midwife. So my whole situation was a TOLAC. And my problem was that it wasn't until after my son died that I was honestly educated that what caused my daughter to be a C-section is the same thing that caused my son to probably should have been a C-section. So after that, it was more of a blame of why couldn't I accept the reality of who I am and just be like, okay with being a C-section mom? And that was the battle that I had to fight with myself. So it was more of an emotional blame. I had a really hard time with being a mother of a living child. Every time I looked at my daughter, I was like, what about your birth made me so disenfranchised that I chose somebody who would lead me down the path of your brother's death? And so for me, it was a very emotional sort of blame. I questioned what's wrong with my pelvis. I go back to the car accident I was in when I was 14. I go back to when I sprained my hip at cheerleading in junior year of high school. All of these things where I'm like, what did I do? Why isn't my body good enough to birth children vaginally? And then pretty rapidly with it, though, also came acceptance of the fact that my fault was in choosing who I chose to walk me down the path of labor and delivery, which was really, it took a lot of work with my counselor. I have a counselor that's through a free agency for bereaved parents in my local community. Unfortunately, she herself had home births with her children and knows exactly how scary and dangerous and everything they can get. So she's really good at helping us navigate the feelings of, you chose what you were told was medical professionals, and a medical professional wouldn't have allowed you to walk the road that you did.
No, you're right. I think we do go from that. Go ahead, Megan.
I was just going to jump in and say, so a few things as I'm hearing you guys talk that just kind of came to mind for me. And I can't speak from the loss perspective, and I didn't see this movie. It's been on my radar. I just haven't felt like in a headspace to watch it. Like I just knew I wanted to have a certain frame of mind going into it. And I just was like not feeling ready to watch it. But when Madison, you were talking, so it sounds like this didn't happen in the movie, but when you were talking about your birth team that was with you kind of cheerleading everything on and saying this is normal and everything's fine, it really resonates with so many lost parents that I've heard in the home birth community. And to me, I've heard so many say that in the natural birth community, that they view death as a natural variation of normal. Isn't that the phrase they always use, a lot of them? And they say things like that. So they're in the
birth is as safe as life gets.
Mm-hmm. There's a few different phrases like that. Mm-hmm. So to me, I think even when they are seeing something go wrong, they're not even that emotionally invested in it in a lot of ways. They're just kind of like a lot of these, I think they're like, some of them are borderline sociopathic in the way that they operate, and they truly feel that way. And then I loved what you said, Madison, about the parents that have had quote unquote successful home births or out of hospital births, and like how successful are they? And I think of a most recent example is who shows up a lot on as like an influencer of that community is that woman who does Badass Mother Birther, that woman. And she had her second birth and like live streamed it, or at least put it on YouTube. And a lot of us watched it and we're talking about it in that. And she had like severe shoulder dystocia, and like you watched her midwives panic. You watched them like get her out of a tub, and that baby get incredibly stuck, and it be very dangerous. And you can see everybody that was working on that birth panicking. They get that baby out. The baby had horrible color, needed complete resuscitation, all of that. Ended up surviving, and she posted within a day on Instagram of that baby in a onesie that said birthed safely at home as it should be, or something, some little catchphrase like that. And it was so misrepresentative of the real scenario that happened. That baby was in so much danger. She was really just by stroke of luck that the resuscitation just timed as it did. It was kind of one of those flip a coin, because that baby looked horrible upon delivery. And then she put it out there to her like close to 1 million followers. I think she has that. Yeah, second baby. It was a Tolak baby, and just being like, "Yep, it's fine. Look, see, this was safe. This was fine." And like that's how this happened. That's how that messaging gets out there. And to me, and then she had all sorts of people commenting on that, like, "Yeah, see, it was totally fine," and it wasn't. It was horrible. And it was. I watched it and was because I wasn't like tuning in live streaming, but when people mentioned it and did the clip, like I did see the clip, and even though I knew the baby under, because I saw the picture, I was sick watching it, because you could just see how dangerous that was. And you could actually like feel, even though they were trying to act some normalcy around it, you could see the people there weren't prepared for how to handle it. And it just happened to be, I don't know if any of the rest of you saw that one, but that's just an example of one that comes to mind.
And you know what, I will say, just because I've been out there for a while, of the years of all the different groups and the places that I've been banned from, and the places that I'm still in, I can tell you that majority of the home births that are shared, even cheered on, are extremely dangerous. Like they go through extremely traumatic, terrible stuff. Like I can actually tell you that, because I mean, even people that I know personally that have had stuff, like sharing things that I've shared about what happened and the things that I've said and things that we've heard over and over and over. It's like, like we're like in a cult, basically hearing the same things over and over to make us believe that this is normal and this is okay. They all heard the same things too. And there's just like what you're just saying, Megan, is like you're in labor going through stuff. the midwives know that things are wrong, but the mother doesn't actually know. Or maybe she did feel it before and she was like, I think something's wrong. And they had convinced her that it was okay. And so one of the biggest things that I hate is this women's instinct, follow your instinct, and yeah, it's your choice, and have your baby at home. The thing that I don't like about that is that women are choosing the decision, not knowing that when you're actually in that situation, someone else is telling you, just like this movie, you have to push right now. Right now is your time to push to get the baby out. And they're not actually telling the mom, like, by the way, your baby's stuck, or by the way, your baby doesn't have a heartbeat right now, or they're not actually telling you like all these different things. So, and some of it might be due to education. They might just not have the education to really know the difference. Some of it might be that they're just not prepared for certain situations. So when they get to a certain thing, they're like, well, I'll just do this whatever move and the baby will be unstuck. Or they don't think like, oh, the cord's wrapped around the neck. That's not a big deal. That's actually extremely common. There's actually many times that like a baby's got a cord wrapped around the neck, or baby's getting stuck. And there's all these different things. And unfortunately, part of the home birth thing with the babies getting stuck is a lot of people they birth babies that are bigger because they don't get any testing. They don't know if they have diabetes. They don't know if there's whatever. So there's also the health complications that could come while you're pregnant. And then you go off to labor and we end up in these terrible situations that you get lucky. Literally, you get lucky. And you could transfer and still kind of get lucky. Maybe you both survive, but you might see stuff happen years down the road and hope that you ended up at a good NICU or something. So, I mean, I'm just going to tell you, there's barely any birth situations that I know of from the home birth community that I've heard that have actually like these perfect, like I breathed right through it and my baby just kind of just fell out and everything was great. It just doesn't really happen. It's so kind of unrealistic. There's always something that kind of can like happen. Like it's weird, but it's very strange, but it's something that I've heard many, many times. I'm actually in some trauma groups where they haven't lost, but they have such birth trauma that they have PTSD similar to what I have, but I also have the grief. So it's very weird, like listening to people that have had similar stories to me and Bambi and Madison and all these other women that we know, but their baby just by chance, the ambulance got there on time. Just by chance, they got to the hospital on time. Just by chance, somebody knew CPR, or it's literally all chance when you're at home. So yes, I do know what you're saying. And that's exactly like, it's really scary, but it's luck. It's a flip of a coin and you're on one side or you're on the other. And maybe you both end up okay. That's the other thing is it's a maybe, because maybe you're both alive. But then the other thing is, who's taking their baby after the situation to the doctor, to the pediatrician to even get them checked out? You know, and that's another thing. I know a bunch of people that got lucky that didn't even take their babies to the pediatrician. So we don't even know if any damage was ever caused, and you don't hear about it till later on when they're older. I heard mothers talk about certain things. They don't find out till they're maybe in middle school. And I was like, oh my God, can you imagine your birth caused something and you don't find out till middle school? Like, I can't. Like, I really just can't. So
does the midwife show any regrets after, or is it just, do you even see the midwife after?
No, you don't see her. She has her moment. Okay, so baby comes out. Look, baby, honestly, the baby was beautiful. I don't know. I don't know if it was a real baby or not, but when the baby came out, the baby was beautiful. And she hands the baby over to them and they're taking pictures, having a moment. She's having her little meltdown freak out. By the way, it's so Hollywood again. You don't know, is this minutes? Is this seconds? You don't know. Suddenly something, baby starts gasping. That's what it was. Baby's like, like breathing like really terribly. And she like turns and she's like, give me the baby. And so like, that's pretty much, you see her like trying to grab the baby where they're kind of like, you know, they're new parents. They don't know what's going on. And she's grabbing baby. And I think he had already called 911. Didn't he call 911 before this? And they were waiting for an ambulance. Madison, was that what it was? Like, I can't remember. Did he? I think he did.
He called 911, if I'm not mistaken, when the midwife said the thing about, you've got to push and get this baby out now, is when she told him to call the ambulance. So then he called the ambulance back. If I'm not mistaken, the baby was like on its way out when he got back. And then it was just
Yeah, there you go.
This
Because
and
yeah,
then
because what happened was, yeah, the baby, so she grabs the baby from them, and he runs out of the room and runs to the front because you can hear the ambulance, which again, it's very Hollywood. Like, that's not how fast it takes for an ambulance, and that's not whatever. He runs outside, and literally you see him like in the road at the ambulance, and then they come up and you just see the ambulance door open with the people all get out, and that's the end of the scene. We don't see anything else of what happens. We don't see anything. And then it literally goes off into like her going back to work, basically, like her going back to life. Like, they go off and they're trying to figure out like funeral arrangements, and like her going back to work and him being back at work and all these things. So it just goes on from there. But yeah, and that's right. Because I couldn't remember about that. I was like, what happened? But yeah, that's right.
So that really could have been like any other thing, that the child could have had another accident, like
that's
drowning or died in a car, because it's really about her grief, I guess, her journey.
If I'm not mistaken, the writer of the movie, her husband, partner, I don't know what their marriage status is, they experienced a pregnancy loss that was like a later stage miscarriage, stillbirth. And that's what they based this movie off of, was their journey of grief through it.
Yeah.
But then they knew about that, I believe, Hungarian midwife that had trials about dead babies under him or her. So they decided, after deciding to write a movie about their experience with pregnancy loss and grief, they turned it into a movie about a midwifery death and the lawsuit and the court case that comes from it. But they show very, very little of the court case, very, very little of the birth/death, and a lot of this extremely personal experience with grief that's not actually truly realistic to what most lost parents go through.
Yeah. And they did, I think what it is the person that wrote it's about their friends. I think it was a couple that is personal friends to them, and it was about a miscarriage. I'm not sure how far along. I'm not sure really much about it, which in my mind, when you go to the point of where they go and they meet with maybe like the coroner or somebody, and they said, we don't know what happened. I think that had to do with, that's what they tell you with the miscarriage. There's a lot of times with miscarriages, you don't know what happened. Now, sometimes you do know what happened. Like, maybe something happened with the cervix and the baby just kind of came out, their body just couldn't hold it. Like, that's something that does happen. I have friends that's happened, family members. So it is common, but there's a lot of times with miscarriage, we don't actually know what happened. So I think they took the miscarriage experience and threw it in with the movie, and then with the whole thing with the midwife. But they knew enough, maybe from the case, maybe the midwife didn't show up or something, I don't know. They knew enough to have the midwife not show up and someone else go in the place, basically. But they didn't know enough about, nobody's going to prosecute a midwife, even if we did have laws and whatever, which you're right, we don't have laws. Like, Madison, you have way more laws than I do. I have nothing here, like absolutely nothing here. And nobody's regulated, nobody's licensed. There's nothing happening in my state. And that's like majority of the states in the US. So it's like, nobody's going to prosecute a midwife on, we don't know why the baby died. And when they do go to court, for the little bit of court scene that we actually see, when they're like going after the mom, because the mom's like giving her a little thing, they actually had a thing that made me so mad, because the attorney defending the midwife says the baby could have died from SIDS. And I was so mad that they threw that in there, because I was like, the baby was just born, and now you're going to confuse people with home birth loss and SIDS and all this other stuff. They're so different. I almost like literally threw something at the TV. I was just so mad because like, you know what I mean? Like, we know they're so different. And I was like, okay, attorney doesn't know medical stuff, but to put it in a movie, like, you don't know, maybe the baby died from SIDS. And I was
maybe the butler did it.
Well, in Danielle, our laws generally are just so bad.